Welcome to the AI in Action podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kelly. My guest today is Marc Held. Marc is the CEO at ODYN. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Howdy.
Marc, tell us a little bit about your supply chain synchronization platform and also a little bit about yourself and how you got involved in this.
Sure. So ODYN helps large manufacturers optimize their in-transit inventory by tracking and analyzing the movement of shipments around the world. And we do that by leveraging as many data sets as we can get our hands on. We look at public data sets like vessel movement, airplane movement. We look at private data sets like bills of lading, transportation management systems, kind of information internal to our customers. We also get our own proprietary data sets that we capture through these tiny little devices. If I was smart, I would have one in the room with me. These tiny little devices that we stick onto shipments at the point of manufacture that goes all the way to the final point of retail to give people like Procter & Gamble visibility into how folks like Walmart are using their inventory. And the main driver for why we're doing this is as these large manufacturers hold on to billions of dollars of inventory every day, we can help them get that inventory off their books is worth significant money. I think Flextronics, they have roughly $20 billion worth of goods on their books at any point in time. And for every day we help them, or not necessarily us, they can shave off an inventory. It's around $60 million of working capital savings. So the numbers are huge, and kind of what got me into this industry was, after I sold my previous business in a similar space, that company was called WEFT. We had developed a piece of hardware to help shipping lines reduce the number of containers they needed to meet customer demand. We eventually realized that that business was kind of weird because the maritime industry is kind of a shithole. We've eventually started to go up stack into tracking vessel movement and making predictions about what was happening at every port in the world. And eventually we realized that we could start linking that information up with commodities markets. So we could look at how LNG, LPG, iron ore, all these different things that were moving out the world would impact the price or how the market conditions of certain commodities were. Sold that business and realized that we had never really solved the problem for our customers of logistics visibility, and that kind of brought us into where we're at now.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because the maritime industry is, if you're not in it, it is absolutely fascinating industry, what is actually going on at any one time. And the challenges that they have that you wouldn't necessarily think about are just huge. Like you might necessarily think about the pirates that are happening at any one time, or the kind of the issues, but also the health and safety of the employees that work there, and also the costs. And it's just an incredible documentary that people should probably check out. That it's not for this show, but just on a side point that I was just actually couldn't get over. So
yeah, and they keep on making problems worse for themselves. Because if you look at, and I know this is a tangent, if you look at a shipping container or a shipping container vessel, you've got a big ass boat that's got 20,000 or so containers on it, and it costs roughly the same amount of money to move a container ship that's this big versus one that's this big. So they're going to make boats bigger and bigger so they can put more containers on it to try to take advantage of economies of scale. But that creates inefficiencies in the market where, because there's so much more capacity on a vessel, you have to price the container moves much less, which kind of has this weird reinforcement loop where, the vessels got to get from point A to point B, and they're not completely filled, so they don't get the economies of scale, and it's this weird reinvestment loop.
And then it doesn't make sense to leave the port. Then you got stock that just left there, and then the whole purpose of actually getting it from China to Dublin, for example, is just being wasted. You might as well just buy it next door. It's just there's so many different elements. So what is your product? Is your product like a sensor, or tell us about that.
So my company lives in kind of two different areas. So we make a little sensor. It's the lowest cost shipment tracking device on the market. that gives you temperature, humidity, acceleration, vibration, shock, location, of course. And we're really just trying to drive down the cost of those sensors, because for us, we are more interested in the data and the analysis that we can derive from those sensors. So in order to change how things are behaving, you first kind of have to measure it. So these sensors allow us to measure the health of our customers' supply chains, measure the performance of carriers, of all of this stuff. Then we analyze it, and this is the software business, to help people figure out, do I ship here, do I ship there, do I ship today, tomorrow, next week, using this route, this carrier, that kind of stuff.
So you're taking in all this, you're taking so much data from so many different kind of data points as well. You're trying to solve a problem that there's an awful lot of complexity around it at any one time. How do you think data science and AI can really kind of change the supply chain? And do you think there's a massive impact to have?
Oh my goodness. Of all of the industries that data science and AI kind of have major impacts of, supply chain, I think, is probably one of the largest benefactors of this world of computer science. I think if you look at how the supply chain has evolved, I mean, logistics, military term, has been around forever. People have tried to optimize and analyze for kind of since the beginning of time. But as we start to gain more and more of these interesting techniques to figure out how patterns are emerging and how things are impacting things across signals. So you might have this, this little event here that have rippling effects down the line. Traditionally that requires a lot of expertise and a lot of people to just stare at the problem. But with a lot of these automated techniques and machine learning and, long short-term memory and a lot of these neural networky types of analysis tools, you can start to automate a lot of that and make things more efficient and save lots of money. Because I'm not sure if you guys are familiar, but logistics is one of the largest industries in the world. I think in aggregate, there's about $4 trillion of spend that happens there. And if you make it more efficient just a little bit, there's a lot of money.
Yeah. So like in the US, for example, there's 3.8 million truck drivers. 3.8 million truck drivers.
That's surprising. There's a lot of people.
So you can imagine that when autonomous trucks come into the industry, which they're more safe than regular truck drivers, you've got a major issue, right? You've got a major issue in terms of...
There's going to be a lot of jobs. There's going to be, actually being able to book all this stuff is going to completely consolidate how people are getting their stuff from point A to point B. Because a lot of the time what happens now is you've got companies that, you've got a mom and pop shop where it's a guy who owns a truck or two, and they'll have a relationship directly with the shipper or directly with, someone who gives them business. And there's not a very easy way to kind of get stuff from point A to point B unless you can kind of consolidate how all this information flows.
Yeah. So what did you quote there? So like 4 trillion? I wasn't sure that.
Something like that. I might have to look up my numbers. It's been a while.
Let's say it's 4 trillion. So you're getting like a 0.5% efficiency bump up. Like the impact of that's huge numbers. Let's see if you get a 1% or 2% increase in efficiency.
Yeah, and a lot of these large companies, guys like Levi's or we generally tend to specialize in the CPG or fast-moving consumer goods space. But a lot of these large organizations will have teams of people literally calling up, ship captains, customs brokers, warehouse foremen, all sorts of folks to figure out first, where is my stuff? And then they have a whole other set of people to figure out how to best get stuff from point A to point B using whatever modes of transit. And it's a very manual process that requires a lot of, Excel. Excel is kind of one of the large supply chain tools, even though it's not really a supply chain tool. It just requires a lot of manual intervention and calculation and analysis. And I think with all of this new interesting technology that's coming out in the realm of AI, we can help automate that and not necessarily get people out of jobs, but more augment their ability to make decisions so that we can really figure out how to cross.
And I think that's really important, because you have to have some types of augmentation, because if you take the decision making and it hands humans and you put it firmly into the algorithm, then you've got a massive challenge, right? Because you're displacing jobs, but also you're going to have a lot of bias in those systems. So those systems have to be kind of really programmed well without that bias. So you do want to have humans making those kind of end decisions as well. And, logistics, and then you look at self-autonomous cars, you're looking at the amount of people that could be saved, their lives saved. 1.4 million people die a year from road traffic accidents, and like 20% of them are like inattentiveness at the wheel. So like you've got a really big opportunity to save lives as well as becoming more efficient. So it is such an important industry. Down in call centers, where kind of AI is just being really applied, it's just massively impacting for the good. So tell me a little bit where you think the future's going in this space, and do you think there's any particular trends that are kind of exciting you at the moment, or maybe companies aren't so quick to take up on?
So I think when you talk about applying artificial intelligence to specific verticals, there are definitely a handful of verticals that I'm personally interested in. I like the application, again, in the supply chain. I like it in healthcare. I like it in the legal space. Basically, any time that there's a bunch of data to look through you've got all these legal textbooks to figure out, specific cases and how they apply to certain things. And then healthcare diagnostics, can we figure out whether or not someone's got cancer or some medical affliction based on X, Y, and Z inputs. Computers are good at doing a lot of this relatively repetitive stuff over and over and over again. And if you can throw more and more machines at the problem, you get to some interesting results. Not that it'll solve everything, but we can start thinking about how to best augment decision making by taking into account all these different data sets. So I mean, with respect to those verticals, those are ones that I think will have the largest impact by AI and machine learning.
Yeah, I think the amount of people's lives that could be saved from actually just predicting illnesses sooner, and actually seeing kind of if you've got the potential to get a disease. Yeah,
I even got a wearable. Like I'm a big quantified self nerd, and actually, the first time I moved to California was for a quantified self conference. And quantified self people we're just nerds that measure everything.
Is that like kind of biohacking, quantified self?
It kind of.
What's the difference? Because I haven't actually heard of quantified self before.
A quantified self is basically just a movement of people that try to quantify all sorts of markers inside of them. So I use this to monitor my sleep, how active I am. I mean, the nice side effect is that it also tells me whether or not there are notifications on my phone. So that's nice.
Is that like a Fitbit, or kind of like an Apple Fitbit, or?
This is a Xiaomi Fit. Okay. And it's like $20. I like it. But the benefit is I can see, the quality of my sleep, and then I can figure out, do I need to be taking different supplements? Do I need to be, going to sleep at a different time so that my schedule adjusts? And a lot of the quantified self movement kind of does have this application in the realm of AI and business. I mean, for us, we're trying to quantify the global supply chain. Problem is, you need sensors. You need to figure out how things are.
It's a pretty interesting thing, because like we're always running KPIs for our business, right? So you're running KPIs for yourself.
Exactly.
Exactly. Yeah, it's a pretty interesting concept.
I'm all about Kaizen and continuous improvement. You got to be able to measure it if you want to change it.
Yeah, what the reality is, if you're going into the world and you're actually treating your body pretty bad, you're not going to be that effective, right? So it's to kind of take consideration of that stuff. And talk to me a little bit about what companies, where they're listening to podcasts like this, they're looking at the industry. What advice would you share with them? What steps would you say to kind of start bringing in some machine learning into an organization? How to apply it? How to kind of go on that journey to start to infer different metrics that could make a difference to their decision making?
So one of the things that we've seen that we like and we think works really well is the notion of external innovation. So a lot of these large organizations, people like Procter & Gamble, Colgate, Palmolive, large companies, they will understand their business better than anyone. They understand how to make products. They understand how to market products. I think by leveraging this notion of external innovation, where you find companies and startups and other events that are not necessarily directly relevant to what you're doing, but might have some sort of tangential thing, bringing them in-house to solve discrete problems and figuring out what return on investment could happen out of working with some of these companies really does allow for upstarts like ourselves, who are pretty experimental in how we look at the world of machine learning and AI, kind of impact these large companies like P&G and Colgate. I wish more companies had these external innovation functions. And there's actually a company out in California called Pilot 44 that we love. They're like our favorite set of people. Their core business is connecting these large organizations with startups to help solve discrete problems. They walk these startups into these organizations to help them figure out how process happens, how these large organizations work. And then at the end of these little projects, they come away with do we kill this, and do we pivot it, or do we scale it? And I think that's very, very useful from all perspectives.
So I'd back that up. I interviewed 100 executives, CIOs, and I asked them, they got onto the executive board, and only 20% of CIOs are actually on the executive board. It's actually going lower and lower.
No shit.
Yeah, it's just it's getting reduced. And you would have thought people are actually getting on the executive board in tech, but they're actually not. So I asked them, how did they actually get on the exec board? And there was 3 core reasons that they did. The first was they purposely tried to get on the executive board, and they developed some personal development, communication skills, and really improved them. The second thing is, rather than taking their targets and say, right, you need to go and get 5% less than you did last year in terms of the costings of running the IT department, they went and took a small percentage of their budget and allocated to new proof of concepts. Mm-hmm. And then they worked with new startups in that kind of ecosystem and said, hey, we've got this problem, we want to get it solved, we've got some budget here, do you want to use it? And let's see if we can work together. And the benefit for the upstart was they got a case study out of it. They got to have the opportunity to work with a larger company. Then they got a proof of concept, and then they can present it back to the board with a little bit of return on investment. The board say, you know what, this is a good idea. Here's some more money. We actually want you to go create an innovation hub internally, work with more startups, start to disrupt the industry, rather than next year, right, you got 5% lower, it could be 10% lower, and those people that necessarily never get on the board because we're always managing cost, versus the innovative CIO is actually managing innovation and driving that across. So that's quite a pretty interesting in Pilot 44, because that's a really, really good thing to do. And any senior executive listening into that, it's a process. Those people are actively communicating, they bring digital dexterity to the environment that they're in the organization, and that allows them to earn the right to be on the exec board. And it kind of ties into what you said there. Would you see companies that are applying AI and machine learning as just disrupting the market, or even just improving how they're doing day to day with their own kind of operations?
I think that kind of depends in context. There are some areas where AI and machine learning seem to be way more disruptive than others. I think when you're looking at like financial services, in areas that are heavily paper and people-centric, that's where you can start to look at disruptive business models. I like insurance as an interesting vertical, where instead of taking the traditional actuarial finance mode of measuring everything once and then applying models onto that data, you can have this continuous measurement process that allows you to be more effective, insure more properly, and whatnot. So I think it really depends on which verticals you're interested in.
We're speaking to Marc Held. He's CEO at ODYN here, and we're talking about his supply chain synchronization platform. And Marc's given us a little bit of an overview of the industry, where he thinks it's going in the future, and some of his kind of favorite industries that we feel that can be disrupted. Marc, where can people find out a little bit more about you and the great things that you're doing at ODYN at the moment?
You can follow me on Twitter. My handle is @m_held. We also are fairly active on LinkedIn, and we also have a website, http:// I can't believe people still say that, ODYN, ODYN.ai. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for your time today. Guys, you've been listening to the AI in Action podcast, and more details will be up on the website.
Awesome. Thank you so much.